Cryo Assassin and Night Fury often kept watch over moonshine together. Being brothers, they were quite inseparable. They often talked about their passion for hunting and boasted to anyone who would listen about the biggest game they've taken down. Even though they were brothers, they enjoyed the friendly competition that hunting usually brought. For years, they've kept score, giving themselves points for taking down different-sized game. Every so often, both of the brothers would hunt the beak things outside of moonshine, keeping their ever-growing population in check. Cryo Assassin and Night Fury made a great team. Together, they felt like they could accomplish anything. Cryo Assassin grabbed Night Fury's shoulder one evening and said, "You know, I've been thinking. For years we've taken down some of the biggest game around, but hunting just isn't the same anymore. I want a challenge, a real challenge. I think we should become bounty hunters. People are the ultimate game. They are unpredictable and dangerous, just as we are." Night Fury paused for a moment, pondering the proposal before speaking. "Only if both of our scores are reset." Cryo Assassin grinned. "Deal." After having said their goodbyes to their clan members, both brothers packed their bags and began to walk away from moonshine. Aviticus, Mr. Killer, and Lee looked over the ramparts as they watched their friends disappear into the darkness. "Magnus, wake up," his sister yelled. "You're going to be late for your shift." Magnus's eyes began to open as he could see his sister Kat standing over him. "I'm awake," he mumbled, rolling himself out of bed to greet her. "Thanks for waking me up. I'll see you tonight." Magnus smacked his sister playfully on the shoulder, grabbed his sword, and headed out of the front door. Magnus and his sister lived in Blister Hill, the Holy Nation capital where the Holy Lord Phoenix resided. It was a busy city with traders trying to sell their wares on their way towards World's End and the neighboring cities. Magnus was a paladin, assigned as a gate guard at the city entrance. It wasn't the most respectable of jobs in the Holy Army, but it put food on the table. His sister Kat knitted quilts and sold them as a vendor in the market square. The day shift was long and strenuous, but he was never short of any action. Sometimes river raptors would get too close to the walls and Magnus would have to put them down. Other times Magnus was catching bandits or smugglers that were trying to sneak their goods into the city. The other paladins spoke of rumors going on in different parts of the land. There were rumors of a clan causing ruckus somewhere in the south, but he never learned more about them. As dusk quickly approached, it was Magnus's cue that his shift was over. His tired legs began to carry him the long walk home where he hoped to have a grog and pass out for the night. As Magnus made his way home, he couldn't help but notice how beautiful the city was at night. Every night he would pass the holy flames that never stopped burning. Some say it was the Lord of Light that kept them from burning out. They were one of the symbols of the city. Magnus arrived to an empty home. His sister should have been back by now. "Kat, where are you?" Magnus yelled as he searched the entire house. Books had been knocked over from the nightstand. There were signs of a struggle. Magnus reached out to one of his paladin friends and made inquiries into the whereabouts of his sister. He learned that his sister was a spy for the Flotsam ninjas and was caught providing one of their agents with intel. Kat was taken to Rebirth where she would work in the mines. No one ever returned from Rebirth, and Magnus knew that best of all. The next day, Magnus was granted an audience with the Holy Lord Phoenix and pleaded with him to free his sister. The Holy Lord Phoenix looked down upon Magnus with his beaming eyes. "An unrestrained woman is an idle one. She must be subdued, lest she seduce and tempt the purity of man into the darkness with her. Through Okran's divine flame, evil will be erased and cleansed. Your sister is evil, and she must be cleansed." Without another word, the Holy Lord Phoenix waved Magnus away. Magnus realized that the only way to free his sister was to rescue her himself. He didn't care that she was a Flotsam spy. She was his sister, and they always looked out for one another. Even though he was a paladin, he wasn't a soldier assigned to Rebirth. There was no way for him to get through the gates without sneaking through. Magnus traveled to the outskirts of Rebirth and began to case the area, looking for any possible signs of entry. After a few days of memorizing the guard timings, Magnus got close enough to see his sister. Kat was struggling to keep up with the demand that the paladins had on the slaves there. Magnus had to break her out of there, no matter the cost. Days turned to weeks and weeks to months as Magnus kept watch over his sister from a distance. He could tell she was getting weaker and weaker from the lack of food being fed to her. Magnus continued to spy on the guards, writing down notes of where they were located and memorizing when their shifts ended. With the information that Magnus collected, he began to piece it all together in his mind, coming up with a plan to rescue his sister. He had everything he needed to free her. As Magnus's shift was about to end, he began once more piecing together everything he had written, going over the entire plan in his head. Once Magnus committed to this plan, there was no going back. He and his sister would have to leave the Holy Nation for good. Betraying Okran was the ultimate sin in the eyes of the Paladins, but it was a sin he was willing to commit. Magnus approached the Rebirth gate and waited for the guard's shift to change. As the guard's shift was changing, Magnus noticed a body being carried out by a paladin. It was his sister. Uncontrollable rage began to fill Magnus's veins as he sprung into action, engaging the paladin that carried his sister. Another paladin joined the fight, but he was no match for the madman standing before him. The paladins from the gate rushed in to join the fray and began surrounding Magnus, slicing at him with every opportunity. The strength of 100 men fueled Magnus's arms as he swung his paladin's cross like he was holding a toothpick. As the last paladin fell, Magnus roared uncontrollably, distraught at his sister's death. When Magnus gained his composure, he picked up his sister and began walking away from Rebirth, and the last thing he knew and loved. The city of Blister Hill could be seen in the distance as Magnus carried his sister's lifeless corpse out of the Holy Land. He would not have her buried in that cursed place. Magnus found a beautiful spot to lay his sister to rest, overlooking the valley of the Borderlands. It was the least he could do for his sister. After placing the last rock over Kat's grave, Magnus stood silent as the memories of his sister played back in his mind for the last time. He hoped she could at least find some peace here. Hatred began to set in. Magnus would have his revenge. A week later, on his way as far south as south goes, Magnus encountered someone along the road he was not expecting. A skeleton figure stood before him, limping his way towards him, as if he had just fought in a battle. The skeleton stared at Magnus as if he was looking into his soul. Without a word, the skeleton pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to him. Magnus took the paper and watched as the skeleton continued on his way towards the north. Magnus looked at the paper and saw a map with the name Moonshine written on it. The gates of Moonshine were heavily guarded, but Magnus decided to approach anyway. A beast of a hiver stood before him, holding his hands around his blade, ready for action. "Welcome to Moonshine," the hiver said. "How did you find this place?" Magnus mentioned that he came in contact with a skeleton who gave him a map. The hiver looked at his friends and blurted out, "Gus!" The hiver turned his attention back to Magnus. "If Gus thought you were worthy, then you're welcome to join us. I am Aviticus Dragon, and this is the Dragon Clan." As Magnus began to enter the gates, Aviticus spoke once more. "Just one more thing. We're at war with the Holy Nation." Magnus's eyes lit up as he gripped his sword. "I am in the right place, then."